A lifetime ago, Savannah strapped herself in and pierced the clouds alongside her older brother. She would later describe the sheer awe of that ascent, calling the moment they broke gravity simply breathtaking. Fast forward to a bitter, snow-swept runway in Vermont, February 2018. A decorated United States Air Force colonel strapped into the cockpit of an F-16 Fighting Falcon, knowing it would be his very last flight. It was a ritual he had executed on thousands of prior occasions, a pre-flight sequence permanently burned into his muscle memory. He possessed an intimate understanding of the machine's violent shudder as the engines screamed to life and the afterburners ignited. Once that canopy locked into place, his entire universe shrank to the glowing green data of a heads-up display and the static crackle of a radio frequency. For 26 years, that isolated cockpit had served as his classroom, teaching him to wage a very different kind of war, one fought not merely with physical munitions, but with invisible waves of energy. His battlefield was the unseen realm of signals and calculated interference. He was a master of the electromagnetic spectrum, that hidden, silent infrastructure enveloping our everyday existence. It is a phantom network bleeding through the very walls of our homes, powering our screens and carrying our deepest secrets, a digital ecosystem the average citizen remains blissfully, dangerously ignorant of. Yet, there exists a highly classified echelon of military-honed specialists who command this invisible world with a terrifying degree of precision. This elite operator happened to be the son of Nancy Guthrie. Exactly 8 years after he hung up his flight suit, his mother vanished, violently abducted from the quiet sanctuary of her Tucson, Arizona, residence. Her captor arrived under the suffocating cover of darkness. This phantom possessed the exact, chilling expertise required to digitally blind every security lens on the street long before a single foot breached her threshold. Are the son's shadowy skill set and the mother's high-tech abduction intertwined? It is a haunting correlation that law enforcement has fiercely refused to address in the public sphere. However, the evidence laid bare in this narrative will ensure that ignoring such a terrifying possibility is no longer an option. We must anchor our pursuit in the cold, hard facts established by authorities on that fateful evening, January 31st, 2026. To understand the monster, we must dissect their handiwork, reverse engineering the physical crime scene to unearth the psychological blueprint of the perpetrator, a foundational pillar of criminal behavioral analysis. It demands a forensic deconstruction of the event's prerequisites, the technical capabilities, the logistical hurdles, and the precise intelligence necessary to pull it off. From those dark puzzle pieces, a terrifyingly clear portrait of the offender begins to form, eliminating the bias of starting with a name and forcing the evidence to fit. Applying this rigorous, reverse-engineered lens to Nancy Guthrie's abduction yields a suspect profile so hyper-specific, it chills the blood. At 84 years of age, Nancy was no accidental victim chosen by a wandering predator. She occupied a meticulously kept property nestled deep within the affluent, sun-baked enclaves of Tucson's Catalina foothills. This is an insulated, highly observant neighborhood where outsiders trigger immediate suspicion, a tight-knit block she had anchored for half a century. Her personal bank accounts did not scream wealth. She harbored no underworld ties, harbored zero bitter rivalries, and possessed absolutely nothing in her background to warrant such a militarized, surgical strike. There was, however, one singular asset that transformed this quiet widow into a highly lucrative prize for a predator. She gave birth to one of the most visible, universally recognized voices in American broadcast journalism. That daughter is Savannah Guthrie, the beloved anchor of NBC's Today Show, carrying an estimated public net worth hovering around $40 million. This is the dark, foundational motive. Blind chance had absolutely no role here. This was zero-hour premeditation, not a crime of convenience. The predator isolated their prey based purely on a direct bloodline tied to an astronomical fortune. The inescapable conclusion? The architect behind this nightmare possessed an intimate, almost voyeuristic understanding of the family's internal dynamics and financial portfolio. They had meticulously calculated Savannah's net worth, recognizing that stealing her mother would manufacture a level of psychological and financial leverage simply too potent to ignore. Out of everyone residing in Savannah's inner circle, Nancy was mathematically singled out. Why? Because an elderly woman living alone represented the path of least resistance, the most isolated, frail, and operationally viable target on the board. Such predatory precision is never born from luck. It is the toxic byproduct of obsessive, protracted surveillance. It demands a chillingly familiar grasp of private habits, the kind of inside information usually held by someone sitting across the living room, rather than a stranger peering through the glass. Let us shift the focus to the actual mechanics of the abduction. The primary prerequisite was flawlessly gathered, real-time intelligence on the prey. The shadow who crept into the night knew her solitary living status and possessed a mental blueprint of the home's interior, allowing for seamless, silent navigation. They acquired the target and successfully extracted her into the void, leaving behind a terrifyingly sterile crime scene save for a singular, grim smear of blood staining the front entryway. The assailant had mapped her weekend rituals down to the minute, acutely aware of a remote religious service she logged into every single Sunday morning. They fully understood the ticking clock. Her absence from that digital congregation would immediately raise alarms and guarantee police presence at her doorstep. The knowledge that an 84-year-old widow partakes in a highly scheduled online prayer gathering cannot be scraped from public records or dark web databases. That is the deeply unsettling brand of data harvested through close personal proximity and deeply rooted trust. It is the insidious insight belonging to someone who shares holiday meals, absorbing the mundane, weekly cadence of a family's existence without ever needing to pose a single question. The secondary component was meticulous tactical readiness. The phantom materializing at her threshold was burdened with gear entirely dedicated to preserving utter anonymity. Over their shoulder hung a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, likely purchased off a fluorescent-lit rack at a local Walmart. It was a deliberately mundane choice, a mass-produced vessel meant to blend seamlessly into a sea of millions. At their hip rested a holstered firearm. Their hands were sheathed in thick, dark gloves, guaranteeing not a single ridge or whorl would be left behind. A tactical mask obscured the lower half of their face, while heavy, elongated sleeves and trousers shrouded every microscopic patch of skin. This suffocating layer of fabric was worn on a mild evening, completely unsuited for both the desert climate and the strenuous physical exertion of a kidnapping. Every thread of that wardrobe was weaponized for erasure, a calculated armor designed to ensure absolutely zero trace of DNA, zero tactile evidence, and zero chance of visual identification would ever see the light of day. Whoever walked out into the darkness that evening had meticulously studied the dark art of forensic evasion, adapting their very appearance to ensure they left absolutely nothing behind. The third crucial element, and the exact detail that elevates this abduction into a terrifyingly unique category, was their technological foresight. This required profound electronic preparation. The phantom who arrived at the property carried a distinct, chilling device concealed deep within their coat. Upon rigorous review, numerous forensic experts have grimly classified the protruding object as possessing a distinct, antenna-like structure. They stepped onto the grounds, already fully aware of the digital eyes watching them, specifically targeting the Nest surveillance camera fixed above the entryway. The lingering mystery remains whether they deliberately scrambled its signal from the shadows before advancing, physically disabled it upon making contact, or executed a calculated hybrid of both tactics. The digital atmosphere surrounding Nancy's residence fractured into bizarre anomalies that evening, an electronic disturbance so profound that federal investigators officially designated it a primary focus. Several surrounding residents recounted sudden broadband blackouts, while a nearby Ring surveillance system chillingly recorded its critical time frame as completely unavailable. Federal agents methodically canvassed the quiet neighborhood, knocking on doors with targeted questions regarding these phantom network outages. The surveillance lens positioned most intimately to Nancy's home displayed nothing but an ominous error message, spanning the exact midnight hour she was taken. Standing directly in this adjacent yard, the victim's brick residence looms clearly into view, serving as a haunting backdrop to the scene. Technical specialists emphasize that severing the wireless connection across such a vast expanse of land would undeniably require a military or professional-grade signal disruptor. When examining a physical jamming device, the operation is hauntingly simple. You position the hardware, align it, and silently activate the power. Independent security analyst Ted Nearhouse demonstrated exactly how such a malicious frequency emitter instantly strangles network signals, blinding modern home defense lenses. Almost immediately, the live feed dies into the digital abyss, leaving behind only a sterile prompt warning that the requested data cannot be accessed. Yet, despite the demonstration, Nearhouse harbors deep reservations about whether localized signal warfare was actually deployed during Nancy's vanishing. His logic dictates that triggering such a weapon upon arrival would have instantly neutralized every lens on the street, leading him to doubt the active disruption theory. The fourth and perhaps most terrifying pillar of this crime was its financial architecture. Within 24 agonizing hours of her vanishing, a demand materialized. A local Tucson news station received an ultimatum demanding exactly $6 million in Bitcoin, shunning the traditional trails of physical cash or bank wires. Bypassing traceable money orders entirely, the architect demanded cryptocurrency, deliberately selecting the most universally recognized digital asset on the global market. They built this extortion model fully aware that, when laundered with elite operational security, this specific asset provides a formidable fortress against forensic accounting. The shadow figure who drafted this ransom possessed an intricate, borderline obsessive mastery of digital ledgers that vastly eclipses typical civilian knowledge. They deeply comprehended how the digital footprint of a receiving address could be entirely erased through sophisticated cryptographic tumbling and anonymization protocols. They recognized exactly why demanding decentralized virtual wealth over fiat currency was a masterpiece of untraceable, operational dominance. These four pillars, intimate target reconnaissance, forensic cloaking, electronic sabotage, and cryptographic extortion, are light years beyond the chaotic nature of common street violence. This was absolutely not the desperate, impulsive thrashing of an amateur. It is the frozen, calculated result of weeks, perhaps even months, of obsessive premeditation. The perpetrator wielded overlapping domains of highly specialized expertise, combined with terrifyingly intimate access to the private routines of the victims. Simply possessing this trifecta of knowledge instantly purges the vast majority of the human population from the suspect list, long before a single shred of physical evidence is processed. Let us delve deeper into the chilling electronic aspect of that evening. It remains the one crucial layer of the investigation that has been practically entirely ignored by mainstream analytical teardowns of the tragedy. Yet, this invisible digital footprint is the exact element that violently narrows the psychological profile of the hunter. In the agonizing days following Nancy Guthrie's erasure, federal operatives quietly swept through the affluent Catalina foothills enclaves, probing residents with an incredibly precise and highly technical inquiry. They needed to know if, during the midnight shift bridging January 31st into the bleak morning of February 1st, anyone had experienced a sudden loss of web connectivity. Several surrounding homeowners confirmed the anomaly, and critically, their testimonies emerged completely independent of one another, untainted by neighborhood gossip. None of them grasped the terrifying weight of the question at first. The disruptions plagued homes spanning all geographical directions from the target residence, bleeding across entirely different network providers, and silently paralyzing completely different brands of home surveillance equipment. To the residents, it was merely a fleeting technological glitch, entirely forgettable, until men in federal windbreakers stood on their porches demanding answers. Then there was the profoundly disturbing Ring doorbell data, which returned a bleak status of being inaccessible during the precise temporal window investigators were scrutinizing. The files were not corrupted, nor were they casually deleted. The lens had functioned perfectly, yet the vital footage from the abduction timeline had simply vanished into the ether. The Bureau continues to dissect this anomaly relentlessly. When pressed directly about the potential use of frequency weaponry, Sheriff Nanos offered a cold, calculated refusal to confirm. He offered only a veiled assurance that detectives were aggressively hunting down every conceivable phantom thread connected to the compromised security feeds. Reading between the lines of that official silence reveals that electronic sabotage remains an active, pulsing artery of the investigation, far from being dismissed. The hypothesis of deliberate network jamming is anchored by a terrifying trinity of facts. The sudden local blackouts confessed to federal agents, the inexplicable void in the nearby security logs, and that sinister, antenna-like shape jutting from the intruder's coat identified by independent reviewers studying the Bureau's declassified tape. We must now coldly dissect the division among technical experts, as understanding the skeptical counter-arguments is paramount before we expose the ultimate truth of the shadows. Approaching the mystery with cold, technical precision, Morgan Wright, the founding chief executive officer of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, cast serious doubt on the prevailing signal blocker hypothesis. The crux of his argument rested on a glaring piece of physical evidence. Federal investigators and Google technicians had successfully extracted pristine, uncorrupted video data directly from the primary Nest doorway lens. This visual record was captured at the exact threshold where the unknown assailant had been executing his chillingly deliberate movements. Had a disruption device been actively broadcasting at maximum intensity from that exact spot during the crucial time frame, emitting enough raw power to completely blind a neighboring lens situated across an expanse of open desert, the fundamental laws of electromagnetic physics dictate that it would have inevitably scrambled the very recording equipment it was positioned mere inches away from. It is a technical impossibility to surgically neutralize a surveillance feed 100 yards in the distance, while leaving a monitor a mere 3 feet away perfectly intact, at least not while utilizing a single piece of hardware operating on uniform settings. As the experts noted, if a localized wireless network suppressor had truly been deployed, one would reasonably expect the immediate entryway feeds to be nothing more than a static void. Drawing upon years of gritty, boots-on-the-ground experience, former investigator Lisa Miller, who currently serves within the Colorado Attorney General's office, echoed this exact sentiment through the lens of practical police work. She noted that patrol cruiser terminals will inevitably suffer severe visual artifacts during routine traffic detentions if a motorist in the vicinity happens to be operating a signal blocker. Yet, the recovered entryway recording remains hauntingly stable, displaying zero digital tearing, absolutely no pixelation, and not a single trace of frequency interference. In Miller's seasoned judgment, the ominous, antenna-like protrusion visible within the intruder's pocket was far more likely to be a standard, two-way communication radio. Such a tool would be essential for silently orchestrating movements with a hidden accomplice positioned strategically beyond the boundary of the estate. This method guarantees absolute silence in the digital realm. Zero cellular carrier logs, no local tower connections, and a completely untraceable electronic footprint. In a life-or-death, high-stakes scenario, this analog approach vastly outperforms any modern smartphone. These are not mere guesses. They are deeply rational, heavily weighed deductions rooted in forensic reality. These observations have not been conveniently isolated to intentionally undermine the plausibility of the electronic suppression theory. Rather, they highlight a very real, deeply fascinating schism among highly credentialed specialists who have all stared down the exact same pieces of the puzzle. However, there is a distinct, chilling resolution to this investigative deadlock, and paradoxically, it is Morgan Wright's very own terminology that unlocks the truth. Wright astutely observed that neutralizing a distant neighbor's security system across a vast, empty landscape would necessitate overwhelmingly powerful, military-grade hardware. Crucially, he never declared the feat to be impossible. The true question he posed was one of capability. What specific echelon of technology could actually pull this off? As it turns out, that caliber of weaponry possesses a highly distinct, terrifying signature. You cannot simply purchase this level of disruption at a local electronics retailer or order it online. Nor is it the sort of makeshift contraption an enthusiastic hobbyist could haphazardly solder together on a weekend. We are delving into the shadowy, highly restricted domain of tactical military electronic warfare systems. Wielding such profound technological power demands an immense level of sophisticated training, the kind forged only through years of active duty within that deeply classified environment. This brings us to the vital nuance that finally reconciles the jarring discrepancy between the crystal-clear primary footage and the compromised distant monitors. A tactically conditioned specialist, someone with a masterful grasp of radio frequency propagation over distance, would implicitly understand that utilizing a broadcast suppressor on the immediate doorway lens is entirely unnecessary. Instead, you eliminate it through brute physical force precisely as the shadowed figure executed, utilizing nothing more than a concealed hand and the cover of local foliage. In this dark psychological chess match, the localized disruption device was never intended to blind the closest electronic eye. Its true objective was to smother the broader, overarching surveillance web, crippling the adjacent properties and blinding the distant desert optics that maintained a direct line of sight. It was designed to sever the cloud-based neighborhood archives that would have inevitably documented a phantom vehicle creeping down the isolated street. If a standard retail blocker was quietly humming inside a pocket, it would theoretically be calibrated to the lowest possible threshold to avoid drawing unwanted attention. which means it could realistically induce visual stuttering at neighboring households without unleashing a complete, undeniable blackout right at its own epicenter. Therefore, the fact that the entryway lens managed to successfully transmit snippets of data perfectly aligns with this chillingly calculated tactical strategy. The distant technological hiccups suffered by the neighbors merely represented the frayed, fading edges of a much more powerful instrument's broadcast radius, triggering noticeable interference, but stopping just short of total obliteration. This anomaly is by no means a flaw in the evidence. Rather, it serves as the psychological and operational fingerprint of a phantom who possessed an intimate, flawless understanding of his equipment's spatial limitations, plotting his strike with lethal exactitude. Analyst Betsy Brantner Smith ultimately deduced that if sophisticated signal tampering played any role in this atrocity, it overwhelmingly suggests an assailant who was personally familiar with the victim and hunted her with terrifying specificity. Such a grim conclusion dovetails flawlessly with every other meticulously gathered piece of this forensic puzzle. Each chapter of this ongoing documentary investigation is meticulously constructed upon a foundation of rigorously vetted evidence and expert analytical consensus. For those stepping into the shadows of this complex mystery for the very first time, the complete archive of our prior case files remains readily accessible below for your review. Commit to following this investigation and ensure your alerts are active, as every newly verified breakthrough in this haunting case will be documented here the absolute instant it surfaces. Keep your attention fixed right here, because the upcoming revelations venture into deeply unsettling territory that mainstream outlets have entirely overlooked. Allow me to unravel exactly what 26 years inside the cockpit of an F-16 Fighting Falcon actually instills in a human mind, and why that specialized knowledge is the terrifying linchpin to this entire ordeal. Originally commissioned into active service by the United States Air Force in 1978, this particular fighter jet is legendary. With a production run exceeding 4,500 units and adopted by more than 25 sovereign nations, it proudly stands as one of the most lethal, unyielding, and historically significant combat vessels ever to grace the skies. The machine is terrifyingly swift and possesses an almost supernatural agility. It is engineered to deliver a staggering arsenal of devastating payloads, yet, chillingly, not a single one of those lethal attributes is what anchors it to this blood-chilling investigation. By its very design, the F-16 operates as a deeply versatile multi-role weapon, meaning the individuals in the cockpit cannot afford a single specialty. Their minds are conditioned to navigate brutal dogfights, execute precision surface bombings, gather critical reconnaissance, and perhaps most terrifyingly, manipulate the invisible battle space of electronic warfare. Every aviator strapping into the F-16 undergoes rigorous psychological and tactical conditioning in the electromagnetic spectrum, as modern dogfights simply cannot exist outside of it. To truly understand this individual's psychology, we must brutally dissect what electronic combat conditioning actually looks like from the inside. At its darkest core, radar jamming is calculated deception, the intentional broadcasting of phantom radio waves designed to poison an enemy's sensors. It is a psychological weapon deployed to manifest ghost targets, swallow legitimate radar echoes in static, and fundamentally blind the adversary's reality. Weaponizing this tactic on an active battlefield demands obsessive knowledge of the exact frequencies pulsing from the hunted system. It requires cold, unforgiving mathematics, calculating the precise wattage necessary to blind a sensor at a specific, deadly distance. The operator must acutely comprehend their own jamming pod's mechanical limits, unleashing it flawlessly to cripple the enemy without illuminating their own shadow in the dark. This goes far beyond textbook theory. It is applied electromagnetic physics, relentlessly rehearsed under crushing conditions engineered to replicate real combat. The shadowy art of electronic countermeasures exists in a delicate, high-stakes balance between offense and defense. Defensively, it relies on hyper-vigilant awareness, the chilling, split-second realization that your jet was just painted by a hostile tracking array. From that moment, the pilot must instantly dissect the threat and retaliate with precise countermeasures, like deploying dense aluminum chaff to break the lock. Survival might hinge on a violent burst of jamming energy, a masterfully crafted phantom signal, or a desperate cocktail of both. Offensively, the methodology pivots to deliberate sabotage, actively strangling enemy communications and blinding their tracking arrays to carve out a tactical blind spot. Orchestrating this phantom symphony at Mach speeds while keeping the aircraft airborne and managing a lethal payload demands years of punishing repetition before it borders on reflex. In this unseen theater of war, signal intelligence and threat library memorization become terrifying matters of survival. The mind of an F-16 aviator serves as a living database, holding the distinct electromagnetic fingerprints of dozens of hostile radars. They must memorize the anatomy of every lethal threat, what invisible waves they emit, what band they operate on, and how deeply they can penetrate the sky. Imagine mapping out every invisible Wi-Fi signal humming through a sprawling, densely packed neighborhood, intimately understanding how each current behaves. Only in this brutal arena, a single miscalculation does not result in a dropped connection, but in shattered aluminum and profound human loss. The absolute mastery of electronic silence requires an unnerving awareness of the invisible noise one's own machine bleeds into the atmosphere. Metering exact power outputs and suffocating your own electronic footprint while hunting inside hostile territory transcends basic military training. It mutates into a profound sixth sense, a primal instinct for surviving as a ghost within a deadly, invisible electromagnetic ocean. You learn to read the ghosts in the machine, deciphering what signals are hunting you, how their frequencies bleed together, and precisely how to extinguish them. For an aviator who has navigated this invisible war zone for 26 grueling years, none of these concepts remain in the realm of theory. It is relentlessly drilled and hardened into the foundation of their psyche until it becomes an involuntary reflex, deeply embedded in muscle memory forever. Consider a veteran trauma surgeon who has cracked open thousands of chests. They no longer consciously think about their scalpel's angle. A master cellist with tens of thousands of hours behind the strings never has to look down to find the correct chord. In that exact same vein, an F-16 aviator with 26 years submerged in electronic combat does not pause to calculate how radio frequency interference degrades over miles of empty airspace. They simply understand the invisible physics with the exact same effortless intuition you use to steer down a familiar street. The 158th Fighter Wing of the Vermont Air National Guard, the legendary Green Mountain Boys, have stood as heavily armed sentinels over American skies since 1946, being the first Guard unit to pilot the F-16. These are hardened, lethal veterans who have plunged into kinetic combat zones across the Middle East and patrolled the tense borders of Europe under NATO. They are absolutely not a weekend ceremonial outfit playing dress-up for local parades. They operate as a ruthless, combat-ready entity, held to the exact same unforgiving standards as any elite, active-duty Air Force squadron in the nation. An officer who claws their way to colonel, an 06, within that demanding crucible after over 2 decades of unending scrutiny, represents the absolute apex of American military engineering. To fully grasp the sheer gravity of an 06, you must realize it sits near the summit, the 6th echelon within 10 tiers of commissioned military leadership. Of all the bright-eyed recruits taking the oath at the 01 level, less than half will ever survive the brutal attrition required to wear the eagles of an 06. Attaining this rank is a vicious vetting process. It demands surviving ruthless promotion boards that clinically dissect your tactical brilliance, performance under fire, and psychological resilience against elite peers. A colonel reigning within the 158th Fighter Wing did not merely receive a promotion, they fought for it, continuously proving themselves superior to deadly operators who were ultimately left behind in the dark. If this deep psychological dive into the invisible mechanics of the case is causing you to question the mainstream narrative, leave your unvarnished thoughts in the comments below. Every single legitimate piece of insight is reviewed. If you know anyone trying to decipher this enigma, send this analysis directly into their hands. The more critical minds dissecting this labyrinth of evidence, the harder it becomes for the ugly truth to remain buried in the shadows. Keep your eyes open and stay with me. We have finally arrived at the identity sitting at the center of this web. His full given name is Colonel Charles Cameron Guthrie. Known in the cold skies by the call sign Arlo, he is the son of Nancy Guthrie, the blood brother of Savannah Guthrie, and the brother to Annie Guthrie. For more than 2.5 decades, spanning roughly 1992 to 2018, he piloted F-16 Fighting Falcons, attached to the 158th Fighter Wing of the Vermont Air National Guard. None of this is speculation. Every single detail comes directly from the widely broadcasted remarks of his sister, Savannah Guthrie. When his time in the cockpit finally came to a close in 2018, Savannah immortalized his final military flight across her social media platforms and live on the Today Show. The tribute was glowing, stating that he had defended the nation for 26 years, while proudly continuing his service alongside the Vermont Air National Guard's elite Green Mountain Boys. She called him their family's ultimate pride and one of the nation's absolute best. Yet, if you look closely at that tribute, 3 specific details demand a much deeper psychological examination. First, consider the phrase 26 years. We are not looking at a temporary assignment or a fleeting chapter in a young man's life. This represents a massive, unbroken timeline in one of military aviation's most unforgiving and highly technical arenas, unfolding from start to finish within a single, fiercely loyal organization. It means 2.5 decades of rigorous tactical conditioning, real-world deployment, and mastery over the invisible battlefields of electronic warfare and electromagnetic combat. This is precisely the kind of elite, shadowy expertise we have spent the past 15 minutes meticulously breaking down. That profile belongs to Cameron Guthrie. The second chilling phrase is, continues to serve. Stepping out of the F-16 in 2018 did not sever his ties with the Guard. Instead, he simply moved out of the sky, quietly embedding himself into a ground-based role within the very same military network. The exact nature of his new duties remains effectively hidden from the public. However, high-ranking veterans transitioning into these specific Guard assignments typically handle deeply sensitive operations. They become the invisible architects pulling the strings in tactical planning, intelligence gathering, covert logistics, and elite training protocols. These are positions specifically engineered to exploit decades of accumulated aerial expertise, granting continuous access to heavily fortified facilities and, quite often, highly classified intelligence networks. Cameron Guthrie's security clearances, deep-rooted military alliances, and authoritative influence within the Vermont Air National Guard certainly did not vanish in 2018. They simply evolved. And then there is the third detail, the bold declaration that he is one of this country's finest. As a veteran broadcast journalist anchoring one of the globe's most powerful television networks for 20 years, Savannah understands the weight of her words. She does not throw around praise carelessly. Labeling him among the nation's elite is a highly calculated, precise evaluation of her brother's lethal proficiency and respected status within the military hierarchy. But when you pivot from this glowing military dossier to the reality of the criminal investigation, a disturbing void emerges. Let us examine the documented shadows. During the chaotic initial aftermath of Nancy's vanishing, roughly documented around the 5th of February, Camron made the trip out to Arizona. Standing shoulder to shoulder with his sisters, he recorded a direct plea to his mother's captors, utilizing cold, highly tactical language. He informed the unidentified perpetrators that the family was completely in the dark, asserting a desperate need to establish a direct line of communication. He made it clear they were standing by for instructions. At that specific moment, his actions were visible, recorded, and perfectly mirrored the expected panic of a son caught in a waking nightmare. This investigation recognizes the authenticity of that initial appearance without question. The chilling mystery, however, lies in the sheer silence that followed. Their mother was described as the emotional anchor of their home, an 84-year-old woman suffering from a failing, terribly fragile heart. Trapped in an existence of perpetual physical agony, she had been taken without the vital medications keeping her alive. Around the 2nd of March, marking an excruciating 30 days into the manhunt, relatives gathered once more at Nancy's empty residence. They left floral tributes and positioned a deeply emotional, handwritten note at the makeshift shrine growing near the entryway. The heartbreaking message spoke of a radiant love piercing through an atmosphere of absolute darkness and paralyzing doubt. Both Savannah and Annie made their presence known. Their vigil was extensively captured on camera and broadcast across various media syndicates. Yet, conspicuously missing from every single frame that afternoon was Cameron Guthrie. Naturally, one could easily dream up a dozen innocent reasons why he missed a single, highly publicized family gathering. But in criminal investigations, anomalies compound to form a broader psychological profile, and his absence fits a deeply unsettling trend. Ever since walking away from the tarmac in 2018, the man has effectively become a ghost in the digital realm. You will find absolutely zero active social media footprints, no listed civilian employers, an utter lack of corporate board seats, and zero visible professional networking. There are no press interviews, no charity event appearances, and not a single trace of a civilian career path beyond the military accolades his sister highlighted years ago. For a decorated colonel boasting 26 years of elite duty in a prestigious military unit, engineering such a flawless, impenetrable veil of privacy is incredibly unnatural. The vast majority of top-tier military brass transition into highly visible consulting roles, civic leadership, or corporate advisory boards upon retiring. Camron, conversely, possesses absolutely nothing that the outside world can verify. This brings us to the most glaring, terrifying blind spot in the entire official narrative. Consider Tommaso, the son-in-law who transported Nancy back to her house on that fateful evening. During the February 5th media briefing, authorities laid out his exact timeline for January 31st with surgical precision. They tracked the exact minute he departed Annie's dinner table and verified the digital timestamp of his own garage door opening, constructing an airtight alibi of his every move. That rock-solid, verifiable timeline was fed to the press and has stood completely unquestioned ever since. Yet, when it comes to Cameron Guthrie's physical location on the dark night of January 31st, 2026, the exact hours his mother vanished, law enforcement has remained deafeningly quiet. Not a single official statement, no casual confirmation, and absolutely nothing entered into the public consciousness to verify his alibi. Elite federal task forces possess the most invasive tracking technologies on the planet, tools expressly designed to pin a specific human being to an exact geographic coordinate on any given night. Mobile network pings, digital payment footprints, and the silent, trailing whispers of banking histories. Passenger flight registries, vehicle lease agreements, deep-level cyber forensics, and the unblinking eyes of surveillance lenses scattered across transit hubs, lodgings, and late-night corner shops. By leveraging this exact web of digital breadcrumbs, authorities undoubtedly locked down Cameron Guthrie's exact coordinates for the evening of January 31st, within the initial hours of the manhunt. A profound silence from the authorities does not inherently equate to hidden guilt. It is merely the standard, tight-lipped protocol of high-level federal inquiries. Nevertheless, the glaring discrepancy remains an undeniable matter of public record. The nocturnal wanderings of one relative are laid bare for the world to scrutinize, while the whereabouts of the rest remain swallowed by the shadows. We must turn our attention to the extortion demand, as it serves as the most profoundly illuminating puzzle piece in this entire psychological labyrinth. In the dark days immediately shadowing Nancy's vanishing, a chilling sequence of extortion letters infiltrated the mailrooms of various news outlets scattered across the Tucson basin. No fewer than 3 distinct journalistic entities went on record, verifying they had been targeted by these ominous deliveries. While federal agents refused to openly validate the documents, they carefully noted that the missives mirrored guarded case specifics, prompting a highly active, dead serious credibility probe. The perpetrators laid out an uncompromising ultimatum, an exact sum of $6 million, demanded exclusively through the untraceable channels of cryptocurrency, deliberately bypassing the traditional banking system. To truly grasp the psychology at play, we need to dissect this extortion attempt into its 2 core elements, beginning with that highly specific method of payment. They chose digital tokens over paper currency, a calculated move that cleanly eliminated the dangerous necessity of face-to-face contact and the catastrophic risk of a botched physical drop. They outright rejected electronic wire transfers, knowing full well that such funds traverse regulated financial pipelines, where government watchdogs can seamlessly track, intercept, and lock down the money. They bypassed money orders and every other orthodox financial vehicle, zeroing in precisely on the globe's most heavily traded, instantaneously liquid, decentralized digital asset. An individual dictating this specific blockchain asset possesses a fundamental, working knowledge that skillfully executed crypto transfers provide a dark veil of secrecy, utterly impossible to achieve within the bounds of regular banking. This phantom architect undeniably comprehends the complex mechanics of encrypted digital vaults and the sophisticated art of laundering trails across decentralized ledgers. They grasp exactly how a destination address can be methodically shielded from the prying eyes of the law, provided the benefactor meticulously executes the correct sequence of obfuscation tactics. This level of digital subterfuge is far beyond the scope of your average citizen's daily awareness. It betrays either a deep, professional immersion into the world of decentralized finance, or, alternatively, a chillingly focused, premeditated deep dive orchestrated solely for the execution of this crime. Then there is the deeply calculated extortion figure itself, $6 million. For context, media databases have long pegged the total financial empire of Savannah Guthrie in the neighborhood of $40 million. That requested sum represents precisely 15% of her total fortune, revealing a meticulously engineered and chillingly precise psychological calibration. It is a colossal enough strike to inflict agonizing economic devastation, the exact sort of blood-curdling ultimatum that forces pure, adrenaline-fueled desperation. It initiates harrowing, closed-door conversations about tearing apart investment portfolios, telegraphing absolute ruthlessness. Yet crucially, it remains just within the mathematical realm of possibility. Severing 15% from a $40 million estate is undoubtedly excruciating, but critically, it is not an insurmountable hurdle. Such a masterfully dialed-in sum strongly implies that the phantom pulling the strings possessed an intimate, granular understanding of the anchor's private ledger. This transcends a mere passing assumption of her affluence, and it certainly wasn't cobbled together from surface-level tabloid speculations regarding network television contracts. Guesswork of that nature might result in a broad, multi-million-dollar shot in the dark, but it would never land on such a razor-sharp, precisely formulated $6 million threshold. Arriving at that exact extortion price mandates a surgical comprehension of her liquid capital, her tied-up properties, and the absolute limits of her economic bandwidth. It requires pinpointing the absolute sweet spot on a psychological curve, the precise intersection where the devastation is terrifyingly real, yet the capacity to capitulate remains intact. That kind of classified fiscal transparency is completely insulated from the outside world. It breathes exclusively within the closed, trusting walls of an inner circle. When a commanding officer steps away following 26 years of active duty, the standard governmental formula generally yields a modest annual stipend of around $15,000. That is factored alongside ordinary lifetime nest eggs and an utter lack of verifiable civilian sector paychecks to bolster the bottom line. The most aggressive external appraisals of Cameron Guthrie's total economic footprint hover modestly somewhere between $1 and $3 million. It paints a picture of a dignified, stable sunset to an honorable career, but it falls astronomically short of a $40 million media empire. The staggering chasm separating the broadcaster's vast fortune from her brother's reported holdings yawns as wide as $37 to $39 million. Naturally, economic disparities between blood relatives are incredibly mundane and hardly suspicious in a vacuum. However, when framed by an extortion plot that practically weaponizes inside knowledge of the affluent sister's banking limits, this monetary divide suddenly morphs into a glaring, undeniable investigative anomaly. An individual within that genetic orbit knew the exact contours of her wealth, and an individual within that same orbit engineered a hostage tax perfectly molded around that highly guarded secret. The roster of confidants holding the keys to that financial kingdom is terrifyingly brief, restricted almost exclusively to those breaking bread at private holiday gatherings. Ensure you lock into our feed immediately. Our team obsessively tracks every single corroborated thread of this dark, unfolding mystery. The revelations we are preparing to unveil in the impending chapters will fundamentally alter everything you thought you knew. Leave your own psychological assessment of that calculated extortion amount below, as the current debate unfolding in the margins is absolutely riveting. By the 16th of February, 2026, exactly 2 weeks and a day into the haunting disappearance, the leading Pima County authority definitively absolved the entire bloodline of any criminal suspicion. Grown offspring and marital partners alike were universally deemed transparent, entirely exonerated, and recognized strictly as collateral casualties of a nightmare, a judicial stance this deep dive investigation officially respects. From the moment the nightmare began, the family's outward demeanor reflected nothing but absolute heartbreak and frantic desperation. While nobody disputes the authenticity of their suffering, the exact timeline of their official exoneration raises a deeply analytical question. When authorities publicly cleared them, the biological trace evidence pulled from Nancy's property was still sitting in a laboratory queue. Sheriff Nanos would later admit to this exact sequencing in his press briefings. A complex biological mixture recovered from the scene, genetic signatures pointing to at least 2 distinct people, was still being ripped apart under a microscope at a private lab down in Florida. At that critical juncture, experts had yet to isolate a usable comparison profile. Meanwhile, a stray glove recovered roughly 2 miles from the house yielded DNA that was quickly fed into CODIS, the FBI's sprawling national database. With nearly 19 million criminal profiles on file, the system spat back nothing but a cold, frustrating 0. Specialists had already fired up the painstaking process of forensic genetic genealogy on that trace, but the family tree remained entirely blank. It is highly probable that federal agents leaned on alternative, non-biological clues to lock down alibis and reconstruct timelines during those frantic early hours. We are talking about the invisible footprints of modern life: cellular pings, digital trails, bank swipes, and transit logs. Law enforcement might possess an airtight justification for clearing them, buried deep in classified files. Yet the publicly available information paints a darker, far more ambiguous picture. By February 16th, the biological evidence was still sitting in the queue, and not a single suspect had been publicly named. Detectives openly admitted their most promising threads had unraveled into dead ends, yet the official exoneration was handed down anyway. Whatever concrete proof warranted that decision beyond mere compliance and good character remains locked away in police evidence rooms, completely hidden from public scrutiny. The authorities have kept their cards hidden. Now, we must examine one final, profoundly unsettling technical aspect of this mystery. Nancy Guthrie's heart was regulated by an implanted pacemaker. Barely weeks into the search, the FBI scrambled a chopper outfitted with specialized Bluetooth tracking tech, hunting specifically for the unique digital heartbeat emitted by her exact medical device. The underlying strategy was as brilliant as it was simple. By sweeping low across the sprawling Tucson basin, agents hoped to catch a faint electronic whisper from her implant, potentially pinpointing her exact location if she were captive nearby. However, the mission's secrecy was blown before the choppers even landed, prompting a sharp critique from President Trump aboard Air Force One. Broadcasting such a sophisticated surveillance tactic to the world effectively handed the kidnapper a golden opportunity to neutralize the threat. Stripping away any political noise, that catastrophic breach of operational security remains a deeply valid concern. This brings us to a crucial, evidence-backed observation regarding the invisible technological warfare at play. Defeating an aerial Bluetooth sweep isn't child's play. The perpetrator would need to isolate the implant's exact transmission frequency and intentionally flood that local airspace with targeted interference. At its core, this is a highly complex puzzle of radio frequency manipulation. The attacker had to calculate the precise wavelength and generate the exact wattage required to drown out the faint digital pulse from a specific distance. It demands surgical signal suppression, jamming the device, without triggering a massive electromagnetic anomaly that would instantly flag their position to federal monitors. In truth, this technological hurdle mirrors the exact phenomenon that paralyzed the neighborhood surveillance grids on January 31st. Both are rooted in radio frequency warfare. Each scenario necessitates an intricate mastery over the electromagnetic spectrum and the dark art of localized signal blocking. Furthermore, the operator must perfectly calculate the spatial limitations and behavioral quirks of electronic interference over a set range. To be unequivocally clear, we are not directly accusing anyone of actively sabotaging the FBI's pacemaker hunt. There is zero official proof of such an act. Yet the phantom skill set required to pull it off aligns flawlessly with the expertise needed to blind a neighborhood's wireless security net. You need a comprehensive, almost instinctual grasp of radio waves and the broader invisible spectrum. You must possess the capability to cripple a broadcast from a distance. This is the exact hyper-specialized knowledge base that a veteran F-16 pilot, honed by 26 years of rigorous United States Air Force electronic warfare training, has dedicated their entire professional life to mastering. Let us separate verified fact from theory. Federal agents are currently probing whether a localized Wi-Fi jammer provided the electronic cover for Nancy's abduction. When pressed by federal agents, multiple neighbors swore their networks experienced sudden, unexplainable blackouts during the exact window of the crime. A crucial Ring doorbell camera ominously reported a system failure right when the suspect struck. Security footage released by the feds clearly shows a long, antenna-like protrusion jutting from the suspect's pocket, cementing this technical angle as a documented, ongoing focal point. Yet, the analytical community remains deeply fractured. Cyber expert Morgan Wright contends that the pristine quality of the front door video contradicts the theory of a sustained, continuous jamming field. Conversely, analyst Lisa Miller suspects the mysterious pocket gadget was merely a two-way radio, facilitating whispered instructions with an unseen accomplice. We have laid both of these expert theories bare, refusing to discard either possibility in this maddening labyrinth of clues. Even Wright conceded one chilling detail. Engineering the widespread, documented network failures across that neighborhood would demand highly restricted military-grade hardware. Meanwhile, veteran investigator Betsy Brantner Smith looked at the sheer sophistication of the strike and concluded the unthinkable. This was an intimate, highly calculated hunt by someone who knew exactly who Nancy was. Let us examine the concrete, unyielding facts surrounding Cameron Guthrie, a retired colonel of the United States Air Force. He dedicated 26 years to piloting F-16s within the Vermont Air National Guard's 158th Fighter Wing. For 2.5 decades, his mind was meticulously sharpened in the dark arts of electronic warfare, radar jamming, and the total manipulation of electromagnetic signals. Even after stepping out of the cockpit, his service persisted in a highly specialized, non-flying operational role. Following 2018, he vanished into the civilian world, leaving behind absolutely no public career footprint or digital shadow. As for his physical whereabouts on that chilling night of January 31st, the public record remains completely silent. Notably, there is zero documentation placing him at the deeply emotional family memorial held on day 30. His estimated personal wealth falls drastically short of Savannah's staggering $6 million Bitcoin ransom, an extortion demand perfectly calibrated by someone possessing an intimate, deeply unsettling knowledge of her exact financial vulnerabilities. Yet, we must be absolutely clear about what is not established. Law enforcement has never officially labeled Cameron Guthrie as a suspect, nor even a formal person of interest. In fact, investigators publicly exonerated the entirety of the immediate family circle on February 16, 2026. No word spoken here should be construed as an outright accusation. That official exoneration stands firmly on the public record. The family's willingness to cooperate with authorities is equally documented. Our sole purpose has been to relentlessly track the exact, highly technical evidence thread that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is currently pulling at. We plunge into the chilling question of signal disruption, navigating the murky waters of expert debate while staring down every valid counter-argument without blinking. We then overlay those facts onto the psychological and technical profile forged by 26 grueling years of F-16 electronic warfare conditioning, forcing us to ask one haunting question. Does anyone in Nancy Guthrie's orbit possess the precise, documented expertise to render this technological sabotage terrifyingly relevant? The inescapable answer is yes. A single figure within her own bloodline dedicated their entire professional life to mastering that exact, shadowy domain. Have detectives exhausted every dark corner of this connection? Does the blanket exoneration specifically account for these highly specialized capabilities? Is there hidden evidence sitting in a file somewhere that conclusively puts this theory to rest? That information remains locked tightly away from public eyes. The federal task force remains mobilized. The hunt breathes on. We must remember that Nancy Guthrie is 84 years of age, trapped by the frailties of severely limited mobility. Her very survival depends on a daily regimen of cardiac medication to manage a severe heart condition, all regulated by an implanted pacemaker. She was violently extracted from the sanctuary she called home for 50 years, torn from a tight-knit community where heartbroken neighbors gathered in solemn vigils, leaving desperate notes and floral tributes at her empty doorstep every single day. She was stolen into the dead of night by a phantom who arrived with a level of tactical preparation ordinary criminals could never fathom. This is someone's beloved mother, a cherished grandmother, a gentle soul whose most rigid weekly routine was simply bowing her head in the pews of her local church. It was a sacred Sunday ritual she honored for as long as her loved ones can recall. And tonight, the agonizing void remains. She is still out there, missing. Should your memory hold even the smallest fractured detail from the freezing darkness of January 31st, whether it involves a fleeting shadow, an unrecognized vehicle prowling the Catalina foothills, glimpses of strange technological equipment, or a hushed, cryptic communication, perhaps an odd conversation that has haunted your conscience since this nightmare began, you must reach out. Dial 1-800, call FBI, or upload your lead directly to tips.fbi.gov. Your identity can remain completely obscured in the shadows. Furthermore, the immense financial bounty for any thread leading to Nancy's safe return has surged past $1,100,000. A shattered family keeps vigil. An entire community holds its breath. A dedicated team of federal agents stares at the evidence board, desperately awaiting that single, fragile piece of the puzzle that will blow this mystery wide open. Out there in the dark, someone is carrying the crushing burden of the truth. They have been suffocating under that secret for 38 agonizing days. The psychological toll of that knowledge does not fade with the passing suns. It festers and grows heavier. A single, whispered confession is all it takes to end it. We commence this investigation by laying out two isolated, haunting realities. First, a highly decorated military officer molded over 26 years by the United States Air Force to analyze, sabotage, and dominate invisible electromagnetic fields. Second, a chilling evening where the digital eyes of a peaceful Tucson street were suddenly blinded, mere moments before an 84-year-old matriarch was erased from her sanctuary. These twin pillars of circumstance might be intricately interwoven, or they could be nothing more than a cruel coincidence. However, there is absolutely zero doubt that these elements demand ruthless scrutiny from anyone determined to decode the exact, methodical blueprint of this abduction. Assuming the digital blackout on January 31st was a calculated tactical strike, a theory the Bureau is treating with enough gravity to aggressively interrogate an entire suburban grid. Then, the phantom who orchestrated this nightmare wielded a terrifyingly rare intellectual weapon, possessing a dark expertise that barely a fraction of the global population could even comprehend. And lurking deep within the branches of Nancy Guthrie's own family tree sits an individual who spent exactly 26 years mastering that very craft for a living. Let us be abundantly clear, this is not a definitive conviction. It is, however, a glaring, inescapable question. And in the relentless machinery of an active federal manhunt, such profound questions inevitably drag the truth into the light. Our investigation refuses to indulge in baseless rumors. We meticulously source our data, we cross-verify the anomalies, and we force the uncomfortable conversations that the forensic evidence practically screams at us. If this deep dive has unearthed fragments of the puzzle completely ignored by superficial news networks, make sure you secure your access to our future updates and activate those crucial alerts. The very second a new piece of this sinister jigsaw puzzle is officially verified, it will be brought directly to you. Pass this analysis along to anyone deeply invested in unearthing the truth. The ongoing debate unfolding in our lower forum represents some of the most intense, analytical discourse we have ever witnessed. Bring your own insights into the fold. A comprehensive archive of this ongoing timeline awaits you below. Ultimately, we must remember the cold, beating heart of this mystery. Nancy Guthrie still desperately needs to come back to us.